Good day everyone, my name is Dr. Mkwananzi and today I'm going to be presenting on the study that we conducted with a colleague of mine, Madame Makongoza. We are both from the psychology department at the University of the Witwatersrand, and the study was titled Levels and Determinants of Experiencing Violence During Pregnancy Among Adolescent Women, the Case of Southern Africa. So just to give a background, as we probably all know, gender-based violence is a term used to capture violence that occurs as a result of the normative role expectations associated with each gender, along with the unequal power relationships between the genders within the context of a specific society. This is according to Bloom's study in 2008, and we really specifically looked at gender-based violence because we wanted to encompass not only physical violence but also emotional and verbal and other kinds of violence that were available in the Demographic and Health Survey. Globally, the prevalence of violence amongst women shows that 1 in 3 women will experience physical or sexual violence by a partner or sexual violence by a non-partner. This, of course, ranges and varies across regions in the world. And so, although it is 1 in 3 women, we have lower levels, for instance, in high-income countries of 23.2%, whereas we have much higher levels in your African region and some of your Eastern Mediterranean regions and Southeast Asia regions of about 36-37%. Specifically coming to sub-Saharan Africa, we also see that gender-based violence, be it physical or sexual violence, is really varied across sub-Saharan Africa. And this data is taken from the Demographic and Health Survey. These are all of the most recent Demographic and Health surveys conducted in sub-Saharan Africa. And again, we see even across the continent, we have levels ranging from 16.2% of women having experienced physical or sexual violence, up to levels as high as 39.5% and higher % of women experiencing physical or sexual violence. Specifically in the countries that are included in this study, physical and sexual violence for adolescent girls has been occurring in the region for a number of years, and this graph shows how the levels have more or less stayed the same, specifically above 20% in all the countries, in all these 5 countries: Malawi, Mozambique, Namibia, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. Unfortunately, for some of the countries such as Namibia and Mozambique, there's only one data point, but there are other countries such as, your Zambia and Zimbabwe that have more data points, so that you can actually see the trend of what is happening over time. And we can see that the highest levels of 54.2% of adolescent girls experiencing violence is what was found in the most recent Namibian Demographic and Health Survey. This was followed by the levels in Zimbabwe, which ranged from about 44% in 2005, peaked at 49% in 2010, and then have dropped to around 39% again in the most recent Demographic and Health Survey. This is followed by Zambia, where levels have remained more or less the same at around 37% from 2007 right up until 2013. And we also have Malawi, where levels were seen at around 25% in 2004. They rose to 30% in the 2010 Demographic and Health Survey, and then have decreased in the most recent Demographic and Health Survey at around 29%, so a very slight decrease. And finally, we have the levels in Mozambique, which are occurring at around 24%, and this was found in the 2011 Demographic and Health Survey. I thought it would also be interesting to see those levels of violence among adolescent girls compared to the levels amongst all women in these same countries that are included in the study. And we see that again, there isn't really a specific pattern, okay? So in some of the countries, the levels of violence amongst all women are higher. For instance, in Malawi, in Mozambique, as well as in Zambia. However, in Namibia, where the levels are extremely high at 54.2%, as well as in Zimbabwe, where the level is slightly higher than that of all women, those levels for the violence amongst adolescent girls are particularly higher than the violence amongst all women. And previous literature has reported that young women are likely to experience violence while pregnant in particular. The prevalence in this case is higher in developing countries compared to the developed world, according to a study by Jeffries et al. In 2010. And a specific study conducted in Durban, South Africa, found that 25% of expectant women experienced some form of violence. Now, predictors of gender-based violence among female adolescents from past research that have been found have been unexpected pregnancy in relationships. This has been found by a number of studies actually. A history of frequent or recent substance use, as well as the sexual orientation of the female adolescent. In addition to this, women who have been physically or sexually abused are 50% more likely to acquire HIV. And adverse consequences of gender-based violence during pregnancy for individuals include delayed prenatal care, so delayed visits to the antenatal clinics, physical injury, of course, emotional distress, vaginal bleeding and kidney infections, as well as mental health problems, which include suicidal attempts, worsening of chronic illness, substance abuse, anxiety, stress, and chronic pain, which was found by the WHO as far back as 2005. For the unborn child, miscarriage and stillbirth at times does occur. 16% of women who experience violence are more likely to have a low birth weight baby, and they are also twice as likely to have an abortion. However, previous research, especially in Southern Africa, has largely overlooked this ultra-vulnerable group, a vulnerable group that we consider ultra-vulnerable, mainly because not only are they young, but they are also pregnant at the time. And previous research has also overlooked the quantitative investigation of determinants of gender-based violence amongst pregnant young women. The previous research has not compared levels across these countries, regional countries, and they have studied adolescent pregnancy and gender-based violence largely separately as separate phenomena. Therefore, this study aimed to explore the levels and determinants of gender-based violence among pregnant adolescents in 5 Southern African countries. And our specific objectives, firstly, was to establish the level and pattern of gender-based violence among pregnant adolescents in Southern Africa, and then to investigate the determinants of gender-based violence among pregnant adolescents in Southern Africa. For our methods, our data we used the most recent demographic and health survey from Malawi, Mozambique, Namibia, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. Our outcome was violence during pregnancy, and our independent variables included age, marital status, educational attainment, employment status, religion, wealth status, and place of residence. For our data analysis, to establish the level and pattern of violence during pregnancy, we used percentages of the complete sample, as well as the percentage of adolescents who experienced violence during pregnancy. And then we gave a description of the adolescents who experienced violence during pregnancy. To establish the determinants of violence during pregnancy, we used binary logistic regression, and this was because our outcome, violence during pregnancy, was a binary outcome where the two answers were either yes or no. And so we used this logistic regression. We did bivariate models, and then we also did one multivariate model. Our sample ended up including 558 currently pregnant adolescents. By country, we had 128 adolescents from Malawi, 165 from Mozambique, 23 from Namibia, 161 from Zambia, and 81 from Zimbabwe. And the numbers really differed according to how many pregnant adolescents had been found in the demographic and health survey for that specific country. So in certain countries, adolescent pregnancy occurs more often than in the other countries, and as a result there were higher numbers of pregnant adolescents than in others. The expecting adolescents were predominantly married at 55%, unemployed, poor, 46% of them were poor, Presbyterian 37%, and having primary education at 57%. Their median age was 18 years with an interquartile range of 2 years. They were also predominantly living in rural areas. About 77% of all of the sample, the 558 girls, were living in rural areas. Violence during pregnancy, we found 29% of the total sample had experienced violence during pregnancy, while 71% had not. And the pregnant adolescents who experienced violence were predominantly married, significantly so at 66%, unemployed at 68%, Presbyterian, having primary education, this was also statistically significant at 67%, and they had a median age of 18 years with an interquartile range of 1.5 years. They were also living in rural areas predominantly, and the greatest proportion of these pregnant adolescents who experienced violence were from poorer areas, poorer households, I beg your pardon. Okay. The national levels of violence during pregnancy differed by country, where the lowest levels occurred in Namibia at 8.7%, while the highest levels occurred in Mozambique at 32%. And then, of course, all of the other countries were somewhere in between that range of 9% and 32%. These are our regression results, where we initially look at the factors that increased the likelihood of violence during pregnancy. So adolescents experiencing violence while pregnant were more likely to be older, employed, possessing primary education. They were more likely to be Muslim or not religious, and they were more likely to be poorer. On the other hand, We also had protective characteristics against violence while pregnant, and these included being married or cohabiting, being a Presbyterian, living in a richer household, and living in a rural setting. So risk factor results appear to be strongly linked to the levels of adolescent pregnancy, actually, where it was the older girls, the girls that had primary education, the girls that were Muslim, the girls that were poorer, that had a higher likelihood of experiencing violence. And this is linked to lower empowerment amongst these groups of adolescents, as well as structural challenges. The expected protective factors included higher socioeconomic status and Presbyterian membership in relation to Catholic membership. So all of the religions, various religious categories, had been compared to the reference category, which was belonging to the Catholic Church. So in relation to the Catholic Church, it was expected that you would be protected if you belonged to other types of religious groups. These expected protective factors are really based on previous literature and what previous literature has already found. However, marriage, cohabitation, and rural setting residence were surprising protective factors. I think, of course, if we really do think about it, the rural setting residence may be largely linked to the fact that such a large majority of the sample, be it the total sample or even the girls that experienced violence, were from rural settings. So I think to a very large extent that result may not really be linked to anything happening per se in rural areas, but because you have such a large dominance of the rural setting in the study in the first place, because of it being in Africa anyway. Okay, so perpetration of violence in conditions where liberal views are held, all right? For example, in relationships where people are not married, so where they are single, as well as in urban areas, for instance, maybe due to what Makongoza and Nduna in a study of 2016 referred to as the discourses of masculinity, chastisement, and deserving situations. So these are the various reasons why men said they perpetrate violence to establish certain positions and certain levels of power. Let me explain. So the discourse of masculinity speaks about women being taught lessons not to challenge their partners. And women are also made to feel responsible for violating their partner's privacy when infidelity is discovered. I think this would particularly occur when a man may not have a position of power, and especially in liberal societies and liberal communities, women have come to a point where they can argue back, they can have a voice, express their opinions, express their views, and at times, in retaliation, to end up ensuring that women know where their place is, right? Violence is used in these settings for these positions to be made clearer to women. In addition to this, there's also a discourse of chastisement. So very similar to the previous point, in terms of conflict resolution, punishment and assertion of power occurs through violence. in relationships because you might find a man might not be able to argue out his point, might not be able to convince a woman enough by what he says. And when this is not possible, then violence is resorted to because he knows he's definitely going to win this battle. Finally, there's also this discourse of deserving situations. So that is when women deserve punishment, in inverted commas. And it's the condoned use of violence if a female partner behaves inappropriately, and inappropriately would be set, the standard of inappropriately would be set not necessarily even by the community, but it could even be by the individual man, and him thinking that his partner has now behaved inappropriately. She has disrespected him, she has shouted at him when she was not supposed to shout at him, she has not listened to an instruction when he had given her an instruction. And to reinforce his power, his dominance, that he is the head of the home, that he should be listened to, violence is then resorted to. So really, in conclusion, this study has provided a quantitative approach of investigating violence during pregnancy in Southern Africa, and it offered empirical evidence of determinants of violence during pregnancy among adolescents in Southern Africa. So our recommendation is that Southern African governments should prioritize addressing structural drivers of violence and early pregnancy. We found in this study that these structural drivers are not only the same structural drivers that have been found to be linked to early pregnancy, but they're even the same structural drivers of violence during pregnancy. So if these are prioritized, we would really be killing two birds with one stone, where we would be addressing early pregnancy and would probably also be addressing violence during pregnancy amongst this vulnerable group. So addressing these dynamics could go a long way in preventing violence during pregnancy amongst adolescents, improving levels of maternal and child health despite younger maternal age, and of course, achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you so much.